Hello. Let me introduce you to your STEP classes. These are 6 half-hour info sessions for young people and others that cover development, behavior, adolescence, risk, distress, and the ACE study. Now, it's actually science that explains people. So session 1 is how our human brain works and develops, and it's presented by the Kansas Traffic Safety Resource Office. So welcome, everyone. These sessions were designed for teens, but everyone else is welcome. We think everyone should know how the human brain works and develops. I'm your narrator, Karen Williams, and for those of you who've seen me in person, yes, this photo is retouched. So, message to teens. Please forgive me. I'm going to speak about you and your brains as if you were not in the room. I know you're used to this. Adults do it all the time. But it's often easier that way when others are also in the room. For instance, on some slides, I will use they and theirs instead of you and yours, or often I will just refer to teens. Now, the goal of these sessions is to help you understand what's happening in your brain, because during adolescence, the teen brain is being remodeled, and it works differently. It's under construction. In fact, the teen years are among the most important periods in all of brain development. The latest science shows that there are 75 major differences in the teen brain when compared with the adult brain. And 15 of these differences affect teens' ability to drive safely. And that's why the Kansas Traffic Safety Resource Office is bringing you these. Now, in sessions 2 and 3, we'll address some of those top 5 differences. Now, the most important reason for you to know about the brain is that in terms of development, the teen years give you the capacity to build the kind of brain you will take into adulthood. Now, no matter what has happened to you before, you now have the chance to have major input into your own development. I mean, basically, your thinking parts start over. So there's nothing you can't learn or do. So let's find out how the human brain works. Now, we have several different types of cells in our brains, but the most important cells are nerve cells called neurons. And neurons are communication cells that allow all the other cells in our bodies to work together. And this is an individual neuron. It used to be called a little brain tree, and you can see why. It looks like a little tree. Individual neurons work like individual microscopic computers or cell phones. And neurons never work alone. They work in networks. This is our symbol for a network of neurons. Individual neurons are linked together to form networks for everything you feel, you learn, you think, you do. Basically, it's like different devices being linked and all sharing the same networks. You all know what I'm talking about, a network. I mean, you're in a network at school, you're a network at home, you're a network at church, you're a network at sports. Okay, you got it. Now, computers and cell phones send each other messages, and each message creates a new or strengthens an existing network. Well, neurons send each other messages, and each message creates a new or strengthens an existing network. We call these little messages brain mail, B-mail. Now, this is how the human brain develops, and there's a few things you should know before we get started. Growth and development are different. Look, I know growth is part of development. I understand that, but it's just about getting bigger. And development, yeah, growth is part of it, but it's so different. Development is about getting better. Now, on average, the human brain achieves 75% of its adult size by age 2 or 3, or 90% by age 5 and 6, and 100% by age 7 to 10. Okay, that's size. That is growth, not development. Okay, so it takes at least 25 years to develop a network thinking part of the brain. So what are they thinking? Okay. And this is a misstatement. 90% of a child's brain development happens before age 5. Misstatement. The real thing, actually, a child's brain achieves 90% of the average adult's brain size by age 5. They certainly can't do things 90% of the way. So that 90% is growth, getting bigger, not development, getting better. One of the most important periods of brain development is during the preteen, teen, and adolescent years from ages 10 to 25, and we're going to cover this in our sessions. Also, at birth, the average human brain weighs about 3/4 to a pound, and the average adult brain weighs about 3 pounds. Now, the adult human brain weighs about 2% of your total body weight, so all of us have different, our brains all weigh something different, but this is based on average. The average adult weighs 150 pounds times 2%, and that's a 3-pound brain. That's how we got it in the first place. Now, male brains are up to about 10% larger than female brains. Go, guys. And female brains develop, in other words, get better earlier. Yay, girls. Something for both of you. Now, nature and nurture partner in the networking. It's about, nature is our DNA, our genes. You can use those interchangeably. Nurture is our experience, what stimulates us, okay? Stimulation, use those interchangeably. And that's about 50-50 each. DNA and genes and experience share it, okay? Now we have networks we inherited at birth. That's our DNA and genes provide the pre-wired or hardwired networks. And then there's networks that are added after we're here. Experience and stimulation wires them, expands them, strengthens them, builds new ones. Now we get 100 billion neurons in our brain at birth and trillions of neurons in the rest of our body. We arrive with all of our neurons, but only 25% have been networked. Think about it. What can a newborn baby do? Eat, sleep, leak, squeak, poop, not a big repertoire. You got to build something else. So it takes at least 25 years for DNA, genes, nature, whatever you want to call them, to switch on sections of those waiting 75% of our neurons so that experience can network them into a basic brain. It's a basic brain. It takes 25 years to build a basic brain. Don't let me ever hear you say the human brain is developed at 25. It is not. It's a basic brain. And if it were a car, it would be stick shift, roll down windows, no air conditioning, no heating, no radio, no media, no gizmos of any sort. After 25, I know it's a ripoff, 25 years. That's what you get. But it's a basic brain. You get your whole life to really tweak it out. Now, experience and stimulation shapes the brain's architecture, which means, look, you got these 100 billion neurons, you got to do something with them. And over time, stimulation does that. It actually builds the structure of our brain. Now, neurons at work get fed. And if I'm talking about the body's food, I'm talking about blood, oxygen, energy, BOE. That's a little fish. They're following the big fish around. That's experience and stimulation. The big fish takes off, little fish follow it. That's exactly what happens in our body. Neurons are networks that are stimulated by experience. In other words, the neurons and networks that are working get blood, oxygen, energy. That's just automatic. But those that are not stimulated starve. So it's use it or lose it, baby. And look, an infant that's not stimulated will have failure to thrive. That's when a baby's diapers changed and they're fed, but they don't get anybody picking them up and holding them and rocking them, talking them, and just reading them books and enjoying their company. And the brain simply says, look, we can't develop under these circumstances. If it happens a little later, I'm going to be developmentally delayed. But if it happens early on, the brain just says, hey, I'm out of here. And that child dies. If you want to know more about how experience affects development, epigenetics is the science of how experience influences our development. You can look that up on the net. I recommend Harvard Center on the Developing Child for any work on that. Now, learning is the first step in our development. Okay, we've separated those two out, but learning is development. You learn how to crawl, you learn how to walk, you learn how to talk. You're about 2 or 3 or 4 years old, you're using a pad or network or computers. And you go to school, you learn your numbers, you learn your symbols, you learn to read, and hopefully you learn to control your emotions. And when you get old enough, you learn to drive. So it's learning and memory that we have to rely on. You don't learn if you have no memory. So learning and memory make development possible. Well, we have short-term and working memory. We have long-term memory. But without memory, we could not learn and develop. If something's messing with our memory, it's messing with our learning and development. And I tell you this because if you hear of anything out there that is messing with your memory, remember, it's messing with how you will build your brain. So, avoid it. So, wow, that's a lot. Now, this brings us to our behavior development. There it is. Hey. Okay. Now, the number one goal of nature, our DNA genes, whatever you want to call them, is our survival. Our number one job of our brain is to OJ, overreact and jump to conclusions. That's what it's paid for. Anything we perceive as threatening or distressing, whether it is or not, triggers an automatic survival behavior reflexes. That's our warning sign. We feel it in our body first. We'll talk about that later. We get this warning sign. Okay, if we don't do something, we're going to have fight, flight, and freeze. Now, if we need it, if we need to run like crazy or fight like, we'll have them. But we get a warning to tell us whether or not we want to do something. Now, when a real situation is not actually threatening, these reflexes are considered to be antisocial behaviors. Dun, dun, dun. All right, let's talk about them. These are automatic fight, flight, and freeze behaviors wired in at birth. I mean, you've seen a baby fight you when they change the diaper, especially if the diaper rash, they just kick you and scream and cry. You see babies hiding out, running away. They can't run. So when someone comes up to a stranger, those that want to run hide in mama's armpit. And then you see those that just freeze, fight, flight, and freeze. Now we think of fighting as physical fighting, but it's not always physical. It can be verbal. You can curse somebody out. You can be ugly with them. Whatever. And when you have no control, it feels good to get somebody else's. Push their button. I'm controlling you. I'm manipulating. I'm bullying you. That's how that's what makes it antisocial. And flight. Now, it's not always running away or truant. You can clown around, just never be serious. Nobody can ever get you really pegged down on anything. Or you can smile beautifully at the teacher all day long, and you got a daydream going. You're just out of there, but your body's there. Or freeze, stuffing it down, hiding, suffocating yourself, just burying your head in the sand, whatever, to escape. Now, these are all based on fear. So it's really fear, fight, flight, and freeze. But frustration, discomfort, distress, anxiety, trauma is when you're completely overwhelmed. You don't know what to do. And there's anger, aggression, helplessness, and hopelessness as your responses. We'll cover some of this later, but boy, if you don't act on these will mess you up. Now, we know what DNA or our genes, its number one job is to help us survive. But our number one goal of nurture, okay, is to meet our developmental needs. It's nature and nurture, nature and nurture. Our development has to happen. Now, when you're looking at a pyramid, you always look in this direction. The bottom is red first because that's where the big guys are. Now, on the right-hand side, we're going to have Maslow's hierarchy or ranking of needs. And if you haven't studied him yet, you will at some point. But on this side, I've just added one more couple of words to help explain it. So let's get started. All right, Maslow says our first physical need is breath. You need to have breath because if you lose it for 15 minutes, you can't even bend over and kiss it goodbye because you're gone, baby. You need water and sleep and food and rest and shelter and clothes. These are all called your comfort needs, okay? Then you need safety, physical safety, psychological safety, financial safety, safety from war. But that calls for something to be consistent. In other words, something that's predictable. If I can predict it, I'm not as afraid of it. If I have some choice over it, I'm not as afraid of it. And if I have some control, so consistency, choice, and control are necessary to feel safe. He also says we need belonging and bonding, which means we need somebody to have a connection with, and they need to have compassion for us. Hard to bond with somebody who has no compassion for us. We need some self-esteem. In other words, do we feel competent in something? You don't have to feel competent at school, but I mean, it's better if you do. But you feel competent and you can contribute. You're doing something to make things better. And then that builds toward confidence. Now, if you have physical safety and breath and everything else you need, and you have all of your comfort needs and your safety met, you're building trust. When you have connection, compassion, belonging, and bonding, you feel competent and you can contribute, you're building self-worth. When you're confident, you're building motivation. Well, there's trust and self-worth and motivation. Those are good on an individual basis. We need those individually. But collectively as a society, we need to meet all of our needs because then people are calm. They're clear thinking. And they can control their own behavior. You don't have to control their behavior for them. These are called pro-social behaviors. Now, your brain just loves these. When our needs are met, we feel nurtured and supported. It feels so good, and our brain just loves it. But when this leads us to developing pro-social behaviors, we can be calm and think clearly and have our behavior in our own control. And when our needs are not met, we feel threatened and distressed, and it feels lousy, and our brain just hates it because we're pre-wired or hardwired with automatic survival instincts and reflexes. And these are a warning sign, but if we don't know what to do when the warning sign comes, we'll be stuck with fight, flight, and freeze. And these can be antisocial behaviors, and they're automatic. So it's nature and nurture, DNA and genes plus experience, survival plus development. Look, if they were on a balance beam, it would always be slanted towards survival. That's number one. It's always number one. But we must also develop in order to survive. I mean, an infant is vulnerable. A child is vulnerable. You got to get to a size where you can take care of yourself. You got to get some thought. You be able to take care of all of your needs. You need development. But Fight, flight, and freeze are going to be as number one. Unless you learn to manage them, we're going to be in trouble. So let's go to brain parts, where behavior stuff happens in the brain. And remember, we're going to focus on the parts of the brain involved in behavior. So let me introduce you to one half of your head. The right hand side has been chopped off, plop, it's gone, and you get half a brain here, okay? This is your hippocampus, a little purple coil, and your amygdala or amygdala, this little red dot. I could never spell amygdala, okay? So I named her Amy G. Dalla because then I know how to spell her, I never forget her, and I call her Amy G for short. Now, Amy G is in charge of our survival long-term memory, okay? Hippo is in charge of our development long-term memory. They split it up. Now, amygdala stores anything that's a threat or fear or distress experiences in long term, anything that has to do with fight, flight, and freeze. In fact, I think of Amy G as the lead singer in a band where her backup band, her crew, is fight, flight, and freeze. Hippo stores nurturing experiences on our long term memory. That's all about our needs. When our needs are met, Hippo has something to store because we become calm, we get clear thinking, and we have some control over our lives, kind of versus each other. And they are for really one reason. The one that's stimulated, in other words, the one that's working the most, gets the most blood, oxygen, and energy, and grows a larger network. Well, hey, we know which one we want to be working. So now here's our half our brain again. Here's our hippocampus, right? Same place, purple coil. Now put your hand on your forehead like you had a second to see if you had a fever up there. Oh, do it. It's not going to cost you anything. Now, prefrontal cortex, we call it the PFC. And in military terms, that means private first class. But in neuroscience terms, it means when the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, is working, you're a person first class, PFC. When it's not working, you're a problem first class. You're still a PFC. So when you have a person in your lives who's a problem first class, you know which part of the brain isn't working? PFC. So let's find out what it does. Our PFC is in charge of cognitive development and executive function. Sounds so fancy, but it is. And it's just cognitive development is attention and focus and listening and concentration and thinking, the stuff that we need in order to develop ourselves. And executive functions is not about running a business. Executive functions is about running yourself, controlling yourself, planning, deciding, communicating, cooperating. Now, all of these are necessary to develop pro-social behavior. And the PFC and the hippocampus partner in its development. So they're all about pro-social behavior. And they're about 50-50. And that's where we want our blood and energy to go. Now, our PFC and hippocampus build new networks, and they're in charge of our pro-social development. So, yay babies. Now, same brain, same hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, you've got your Amy G. Look, Amy G is about survival. So she gets fed blood, oxygen, and energy all the time. But when we're upset, our Amy G gets greedy. And she takes that board and it's all one-sided. When we're upset, she's all about fight, flight, and freeze. And if we're upset a long time, we stay upset, it can cost us big time. Because when we're upset, most of our blood, oxygen, and energy is going to Amy G and her crew, fight, flight, and freeze. And hey, that means that our PFC and Hippo are up in the air, unable to do their jobs, and our development is at risk. Well, that's not good. So how do we know this? Okay, this comes from the Center on Developing Child at Harvard University, and it's pictures of our network, prefrontal cortex and our hippocampus, actually. So let's look. You have normal networks, a typical mini neurons, okay? Look, many connections. New connections, neural networks are increasing. That's what you want because that's what the PFC and the hippocampus are supposed to be doing. But when you starve them, they become disrupted. It used to say damaged, but it's disrupted. Disrupted connections. Networks just shrink. Now, it says at the bottom, the blood, oxygen, and energy has been diverted away from the PFC and hippocampus to Amy G and fight, flight, and freeze. The networks for Amy G and fight, flight, and freeze get stronger and stronger, and that's what you're building. You don't want that. Now, we need a hero, something to break in on this. Here's the other side of our brain. Somebody else drew this one, and they drew it with the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, the color the same, because they knew they worked together. They made them the same color. There's our Amy G. We've got all the parts. Okay. Right in the middle of our brain is our reward or pleasure center. Yay. And it's in charge of when our needs are met. I mean, anytime when our needs are met, our reward center is stimulated. So as we meet our needs, we get comfort, consistency, all those kinds of things. Our reward center is so happy. And when we are calm, we can think clearly. we can control our behaviors in our control. We're doing extremely well. Now, Amy G takes a back seat. Oh, yeah. And our reward center makes sure that our PFC and hippocampus get their fair share of blood, oxygen, and energy. There's our blood, oxygen, and energy. Oh my God, this is what we need. We need our reward center working full time. It is absolutely amazing. He's our hero. Have you ever been in the middle of a seesaw? That's where the power is. Right in the middle. You can shift your weight to favor either side. When you were kids, the adults in your lives were in the middle and they could decide everything, either for you or against you. But now you get the chance to be in the middle. It's hard work. Life keeps jerking your chain and pulling you in one way or the other, and it's just never letting up. It's just wearing you out. But you get to be there. You get that power. And we can develop pro-social behaviors only when we're in balance. That's called homeostasis. It's a chemical state in which we have everything going for us. Now, we want to be all set. We want to have our PFC and hippocampus working full time because that's what's going to build us, develop us. When we're upset, well, we probably need now and then fight, flight, and freeze, and we need to move Amy G her blood, oxygen, and energy. Not all the time. When we're all set and we are upset and we want to be all set, we got to be able to reset. And that means we're going to have our needs met. We're going to feel calm and clear and control our own behavior. And childhood, keeping you in balance was the job of your adults. But now, part of that job is yours. Okay, I know the previous explanation is oversimplified, but science makes it clear that when Amy G takes charge, development goes in the dumpster. But our brain and the rest of our body have ways to prevent that from happening, and we're going to talk about these. And one of the key purposes of these sessions is to help you build some calming habits. When you get that alarm go off, you know what to do. To put Amy G in her place so that not only your teen years, but the rest of your life will be all that it can be. So thank you for joining us for session 1. These are STEP classes presented by the Kansas Traffic Safety Resource Office. Join us for session 2, how survival instincts and temperaments affect our behavior. And we'll find out about one of the top 5 differences to the teen brain. Well, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And here's my email if you need to get a hold of me. So take care of yourselves. Bye.